All right. I saw Gene this morning and I said, in preparing for this, I thought I knew where it was going to go. And it surprised me that I wasn't even close to understanding what the oil embargo was about. What I'm going to try and do is kind of upfront give you why I think that it is a much bigger event than what we thought it was. For most of us, we remember the oil embargo. It was 1973, 1974. We remember the gas lines. We remember the shortages. We remember the lack of home oil. We remember the double dip recession and how our economy was thrown into kind of a topsy-turvy situation. And when it was over, we thought it was over. And that's not really what it is about. What in the very first forum we did in this kind of project of mine, looking at the history of my lifetime, one of the things we talked about was that from 1945 to 1970, there was a 25-year period of just unbroken American economic boom. In point of fact, I think we all thought it was just going to go on forever, that the American economy was a juggernaut, that the country was so big and had so many resources. We had oil, we had all the minerals you would want, we had a large labor force, that nothing could happen that could derail our economy. And we were wrong. And what we ultimately discovered, we should have known beforehand, was that the American golden age of the economy was built on cheap oil.
Fine, Sister Anna Maria.
And when we lost cheap oil, that changed the economy. One of the realities of American life is, and of the life of the industrial world is, that we are addicted to oil and have been. There is nothing you can do that does not depend on oil. If you want to wage war, you don't just have men marching out onto the battlefield. You have tanks, you have planes, you have aircraft carriers, you have helicopters. It all runs on oil. If you want to have an industrial economy, you can't make anything without expending large amounts of oil. If you want to transport those goods from the factory to the retail outlet, that takes oil. There is absolutely nothing that doesn't take oil. Now, we were blessed during the bulk of this period, almost all of this period, with cheap oil because we had it. Back in the 1950s and 1960s, the Middle East was not the great exporter, the number one exporter of oil. We were. And then what happened is right around 1970, and part of it is the Vietnam War coming into this, which is an enormous expenditure of oil. But there was also on the domestic side an incredibly steep growth in our consumption of oil. We couldn't keep up with it in terms of our own production. And by 1973, just before the oil embargo, we were buying 35% of our oil. And when all of a sudden, what the OPEC nations did was to first double the price of a barrel of oil, and second, say we're going to decrease our exports by 5% each month to all nations supporting Israel. And then when we gave Israel at the end of the war a $2.2 billion aid package, OPEC nations decided to turn off the spigot entirely. And we couldn't make up that 35%. And what you found is you would go to, at any given day, 20% of all gas stations had a sign out that said, no gas. Heating oil, real shortages. Try and imagine spending a winter in Minnesota without heating oil. The auto industry was devastated because the auto industry in America was making big gas guzzling cars. And Americans decided we better start buying Japanese models, which are smaller and more fuel efficient. There wasn't a sector of the economy, not just in the United States, but globally, that wasn't hammered by this OPEC decision to close off the oil spigots. And what is important about this is not just that, oh, we suffered a temporary economic downturn. but don't worry, we'll be back. It was the understanding that this could happen at any time. And over the next 30, 40 years, there's going to be about 8 different, they used to call them oil shocks, where the oil industry would do something would happen and the oil industry would either cut down supplies or raise the price suddenly to large amounts. And we would go into an economic turmoil. I mean, during the oil embargo, 73, 74, we had what they called stagflation, a term that helped to destroy Jimmy Carter's administration. Stagflation is when inflation, the rate of inflation and the rate of interest rates added up to more than 20. And we were at 22, 23, 24%. Those are unsustainable. And over the next several decades, we would get hit with different oil shocks, which would do similar things to us. And here's really what my thesis is. The oil embargo and its impact smacked Americans in the face. They were first shocked, then angry, then frustrated, and then felt a kind of impotence because they realized something. We're not in control. We thought we could ride out any of these issues that might happen around the globe. We couldn't. Our addiction to oil, our dependency on oil was so great that that the players in the Middle East could actually stop us in our tracks. And at one point, Secretary of Defense James Schlesinger literally suggested, why don't we just go to the Middle East and do a military takeover of the oil fields? And the Arabs' response to that, if you do, we'll set all the oil reserves on fire. You can't do that. But again, one of the most famous events of Carter's presidency, and one of the things that helped to undermine his attempt at re-election, was his Malaise speech. Well, his Malaise speech, he was talking about exactly this. Americans all of a sudden realized we're not in control, that these oil kings could, in fact, take a seat at the international table as equal players. They may not have nuclear bombs, but they had control of the oil spigot.
They had an economic.
And if they turned those spigots off, we were vulnerable. Again, that is my theme. We, not just the United States, but the whole industrial world, were addicted to oil. And when oil was cheap and we had easy access to it, we never noticed there was a problem. But just like with the drug addict, if you take the drug away, all of a sudden they understand how much they need that oil. And so we entered into an era of limitations. Up until that time, we'd either had cheap oil, producing it ourselves, or we could get it relatively cheaply because we would make deals with the Middle East and we could pretty much control and set the price. The oil embargo was the first time where, on a united front, the oil producing countries said, you're not in control, and we can actually bring you to your knees. And to a degree, they did bring us to our knees. And as a matter of fact, once the oil embargo is over, it only lasts
Almost 2 years.
No, it's 248 days. But its impact was throughout the 70s. The prices didn't come down. We were hoping once they turned the spigots back on, everything would go back to normal and we'd be that juggernaut again. We spent the 70s in real economic difficulties. It's really not until the 80s, in the latter part of Reagan administration, first administration, that the economy starts to climb up again. We spent nearly a decade or 3/4 of a decade suffering in ways that countries around the world had suffered for decades, but we had thought we were immune to. And it's, again, I think this is a turning point in the modern American history, that all of a sudden we know, as powerful as we are, as many resources as we have, as much riches as we have, the addiction to oil makes us vulnerable. And again, just think throughout history, through 20th century history, that need for oil was always central for people. when we think of, say, Pearl Harbor, we just think of it as, oh, the Japanese were trying to take out our Navy so that we would be debilitated and not able to fight them. That wasn't their primary purpose. The Japanese had zero oil. They needed open ocean lanes to their oil source. The US Navy, uncrippled, could easily have blocked those lanes. They could have put a blockade on, and the Japanese military, as strong and powerful as it was, would come to a standstill. If you think about World War II, how many of the battles were fought in North Africa, versus Erwin Rommel, the Desert Rat, Desert Fox? Yeah, sorry. Northern Africa was not territory that meant something to our war aims, but it was the pathway to the oil. So block that. When we think of the Suez Crisis, 3/4 of European oil went through the Suez Canal.
Mm-hmm.
If the Arabs, if the Egyptians in particular, can turn off that flow, Europe would be crippled. And I want you to think of these things as a series of earthquakes. Let us say the Suez Crisis had turned out differently and Egypt closed the canal to the oil flow to Europe. That would be an earthquake in the European economy. And that earthquake in the European economy would create an earthquake in our economy and in all the global industrial economies around the world. And I think prior to the oil embargo, we didn't realize our vulnerability. And for the first time, I think in the post-World War II era, American confidence was shaken. And we have ever since then been trying to become energy independent. We haven't succeeded, no matter how many things we've tried. Find alternate sources, find access to different countries that have oil, produce more oil on our own. We still haven't found that energy independence because the addiction is as great as it ever was, and maybe even greater because our consumption is enormous. And if you think about the world we live in today, China, back in this era of the oil embargo, was not a huge user of oil. They were not really industrialized. But when they did become an industrial nation, they were a vacuum cleaner. With the size of China, with the enormity of their population, they needed enormous amounts of oil. And that was an earthquake in the global oil market, which meant that the tremors would be felt in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, and you name it. And so I hope that what I have made clear is our images of the oil embargo are of the inconvenience of gas stations not having enough gas, of rationing, of odd and even days when you could get gasoline, etc. And we've sometimes tend to minimize what it was really about. It was a shake. American confidence was shaken here because we realized our vulnerability. And the other main point I want to make here is this oil embargo was triggered by our support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War. But what we have to understand is the Arab-Israeli conflicts over the years are merely complicating factors in the role of oil in our life. Most of the oil shocks that have come to us since have not been related to the Arab-Israeli conflicts. There have been all kinds of other factors that have caused them, and we'll go into some of them tonight. So this story is not about tonight. It's not about 1973, 1974. It's about the new world we entered in 1973 and that we are still living in today, that we are still subject to those changes. I mean, if you want to think about it and how it impacts us, a handful of years ago, Jamal Khashoggi was murdered. And every politician on the planet, including almost every American politician, condemned the Crown Prince.
Saudis.
The Crown Prince MBS. And but when Biden had a state visit with the Crown Prince, we were friends.
Yeah.
Because we cannot afford the potential oil shock that a distancing of the relations between the Saudis and the United States and our economy would make. So again, we are still living in the world created by the oil embargo. Okay.
Michael,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
one thing that I've noticed over the years is whenever there's one of these earthquakes, you call them, the auto industry starts talking about smaller cars and more gas efficient and more miles per gallon. And some people start buying those cars. And then a year or two later, everyone forgets about it and they go back to the SUVs and the big cars and the trucks and the Hummers, and they don't give it a thought. They don't give it a thought anymore. And then 5 years, 6, 10 years later, it happens again, and then it's just a cycle over and over again.
Yeah, boy, you are right on target. Absolutely. And again, Carter makes his Melez speech trying to say, hey, we have to come to terms with the reality of our new set of circumstances in the world, and that they're not just circumstances for today, but they go beyond that.
Excuse me, what was the role of the Shah at that point in time? Was he, I think he was friendly towards us.
Oh, he was absolutely, he was our friend.
And and did he supply oil to the Middle East?
He did. I'm going to really get to that a lot later, but I'll give you the quick one, which is the Shah had a problem. He spent too much, and his economy was always shaky. So he needed higher oil prices. So when we turned to him at the moment of crisis, he didn't come through for us. We got most of our 35% oil that we needed, we got from the Shah, we got from Iran. But when the oil crisis hit, and we asked him to help us out by lowering the prices and flooding the market with cheap oil, he said, I need the money. And so he did not come through for us. But one of the storylines that we're going to be following tonight is our best friend in the Middle East was not Israel, it was Iran. And in the course of what is going to happen during the 70s, we are going to ditch Iran, and the Saudis are going to become our staunch allies, our best friends. And that is a major seismic shift in the Middle East, because Iran has traditionally been the great power in that region. And they were our best friends, and we sold them lots of arms. And again, we got lots of benefits from them. But when push came to shove at this moment of crisis, the Shah did not come through. And this is really under the Jerry Ford administration. It's a complicated story, but a couple of years after the oil embargo, we run into another oil crisis almost immediately. And I'm going to get into that, but I don't want to jump the gun. Okay, so we have this oil embargo triggered by the Yom Kippur War, and we have all the things that we know about, the oil shortages, the gas lines, everything, and a double dip recession, the most serious recession that America had experienced since the Great Depression. And then as we start to come out of it, we go back into it again, because the economy is unable to right itself and stay stable. And there was a great deal of uneasiness in America during this decade. And again, part of what Reagan's appeal is, he is the man who said, this is morning in America. Stop being so scared. Don't be, America can handle all of this, and we will grow stronger and better than ever. And it was a positive message that a whole lot of Americans wanted to hear, because they weren't thinking positive thoughts, many of them.
Could I just say something? One should probably look at why OPEC was created. OPEC was created as a counterweight to the sheer economic and political power that the people who consumed the oil had. They just didn't come out of the blue. There was a reason. And there is also a reason why America has so much oil, and so does Great Britain, and they're not a member of OPEC because they want to control the oil that they have. So we cannot expect people who have a resource to be beggars. Which is why OPEC was created. It was created as a counterweight to the sheer might of everybody else who is buying their oil.
Absolutely.
Couldn't be more right. Only it's even worse than what you're saying. Let's go back to a little prehistory here. In 1908, oil is discovered in Iran. Okay, 1930, oil is discovered in Saudi Arabia. The larger reserves are in Iran. Iran is going to be the big oil power, the big power in OPEC, the big power in the Middle East. Now, what happens? The British form with Iran the Anglo-Iranian oil company, which is British Petroleum today, BP. Okay. Hey, Mike. They form that company and they get a 60-year contract. And the 60-year contract says, we will control the drilling. We will control how much will be extracted. We will control how much will be exported. We will control to whom it gets exported. We will control the price of the oil. And for that, we will take the lion's share of the profits and we will give Iran and then later other oil producing countries some percentage, but it's relatively speaking a small percentage. Okay. Now, what a complicating factor in here. Winston Churchill is ahead of the curve. He understands England has zero oil. Remember, we were talking about Japan with Pearl Harbor. They need access to oil. Iran is their key. So Winston Churchill passes a bill through Parliament, in which the British government buys 51% of the Anglo-Iranian oil company. And now it is the British government who has control of all of these questions of how much oil will flow out, what the price will be, all of these matters. Now, over time, there is a concern on the part of the oil producing country of the countries like England that the oil producing countries might nationalize those companies, and that was the great fear, and so that had to be prevented. Now, pre-OPEC, you had countries would negotiate, say Iran with the British government, for an incremental change in the profits that they would get, but they were always incremental. Then in 1951, here's the first earthquake. In Iran, Mossadegh is elected prime minister, and the Shah is ousted. And one of the first things that Mossadegh will do, he nationalizes the Anglo-Iranian oil. That is what cannot be allowed. That is the phrase I was using with Gene. That's an earthquake. Because if it happens there to this oil company, all the other oil companies have their hands in the Middle East. You've got Texaco, Shell, Gulf, all of them are there. And who's next? And that is when in 1951, a CIA-led coup by Kermit Roosevelt overthrew Mossadegh, a democratically elected leader of Iran, and undo the nationalization process. It is once again the British Anglo-Iranian oil company. That's another earthquake in the Middle East, though. And they are, again, you can draw a direct line between what happened in 1951, happened in 1979 when the hostages are taken. They are directly connected. And again, it reminds me of James Schlesinger saying in 73, when the oil embargo was put on, well, why don't we just go with our military and take over the oil fields? These things, countries have memories, not just people have memories. And the ousting of the Shah, and then the reinstatement of the Shah via a coup led by the CIA. In 1979, when Carter agrees to take the Shah in for his hospitalization, I think for the people in Iran, this is 1951 all over again. They're going to put him back on the throne, and who knows what the economic repercussions will be.
There's a really good book about the Shah of Iran called The Shah of Shahs.
It's a great book.
Yes.
Yes. At any rate, that story that Fern was actually leading us into about why there would be this move towards nationalizing oil companies. It's because, and why form OPEC? It's because the deals that were made, and these were always long-term contracts, 60-year contract, 50-year contract.
Excuse me. In your opinion, do you feel if the people in Iran had a free election, they would vote out the clerics, theocrats, and reinstate?
In today's world, I think they would.
Shah?
That's off of this. I think what they did in 51 was they voted out what they saw as a cruel, punitive Shah, and put in a democratically elected leader. And we, unfortunately, our fingerprints are all over it, helped to undo their democratic election and reinstate the Shah. And in terms of what his political impact would be over the decades, we have paid for that terrible mistake. All right. I know this is
So it seems that when we get a new president, very frequently, for whatever reason, an experience, desire to look presidential, they so frequently do something to screw up. And we always just hear Bay of Pigs, but this is worse than Bay of Pigs. This is worse than Waco and whatever.
Yeah. But one of the things that I will say is it's come into our psyche, and we understand our dependency on oil and on keeping the prices low. So again, going to the murder of Khashoggi, the Saudis paid no price for it. MBS paid no price for it because we need the oil. Last month, we were doing the Yom Kippur War, and Kissinger didn't want Israelis to have a big victory and didn't want the Arabs to have the Egyptians and Syrians to have a big victory. He wanted a kind of stalemate because that way he could do things to help Israel and keep them safe, and he could do things that did not offend the Arabs because we needed their oil, and he knew it. So that he didn't want, it's not, he was all gung-ho, let's have Israel wipe out the Egyptian army and the Syrian army. He absolutely did not want that. He wanted a stalemate where it was unclear and America could come in and satiate the needs of the Israelis to some degree and satiate the desires of the oil producing Arab nations at the same time and keep them both happy. It didn't work, especially at the end when he gave $2.2 billion to as an aid package to Israel. That paid for the Yom Kippur War. There's a different money scale here. 2.2 billion was the cost of that war. And the Arabs were incensed and turned off the spigots. I also want to point out something else here that's going on here, and it relates to stuff that Farron was talking about, which is we also have to recognize when we think of this period from 1950 to late 1980s as the Cold War, parallel to that, and maybe more impactful around the world, is the anti-colonialism movement. And these oil-producing countries, they weren't called colonies, they were called mandates, but it was a colonial relationship. And you're having every colonial nation around the world trying to throw off the chains of imperialism and trying to establish their independence. And there's a lot of antagonism towards their former colonizers. And so the oil company, the oil countries the end of World War I, they had helped the Allies in World War II, rather. They had helped the Allies and had received vague promises that they would be given their independence. And it wasn't given. When the Ottoman Empire fell, they had been under the control of the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire fell, they thought, free at last. And with our oil, we can take a place in the world in relative reasonable power position. But they were put under British and French control. And that has not been forgotten. And it is not forgotten as OPEC flexes its muscles. They're remembering how their rights were repressed, how their freedom was limited. And now they are willing to show, wait a minute, we have a tool here that we can use and show that we can actually have more control than you
think?
Yeah. Yeah.
Choose to open it.
Okay. So
Something else, so,
yeah.
there's also this amongst the oil producing countries in that Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia are the two biggest,
Giants.
most powerful ones, and basically don't get along with each other. And so going into 1973 war, you know, we were opposed to Iran,
They were
but,
friends.
but Saudi was even sent troops to help the Syrians. So at some point with the Iranian Revolution, you know, now we have no relations at all with the Iranians. And we do have these good relations with the
That's
Saudis.
going to start in 1976 with Gerald Ford as president. And that's a big story in here. There's going to be a shift in the Middle East power balance. Iran is going to decline. And traditionally, Iran has always been the great power in that region. But what is going to happen is we ask a big favor of Iran to help us avoid some economic difficulties we were in, and they turn us down because they're in economic difficulties and they need higher oil prices. And then Ford goes to King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, makes the deal with him instead. And all of a sudden, Iran is going to be shunted off to the side. Prior to this deal, we bought almost all of our oil, the oil that we had to buy. We produce a lot, obviously, but the oil we bought from Iran. Now we stop buying from Iran and buy from the Saudis. Iran's economy goes in the tank. That causes a lot of unrest. And along with all the other problems the Shah has had, that leads to the Iranian Revolution. There's direct links here. And again, one of the important lines in this whole story is there's a change in the balance of power. America is not as powerful as she thought she was, that we had an addiction to oil and could be controlled to some degree, or we couldn't control circumstances the way we thought we would always be able to. And in the Middle East, the Saudi Arabian kings, the real powers, and Iran falls. And an important distinction between the Saudis and Iran. Iran is not an Arab nation, Persian. And so when these Arab-Israeli conflicts are going on, they're not a part of it.
Credit card.
They're also Shia.
Yes. Yes.
And the thing is, Iran is going nowhere. It has been in the universe before Alexander the Great.
Yep.
It's going nowhere at all. It's going to be here for a long time. And another thing is that China gets this oil from Iran. They're not going to change their policy to suit anybody. They need to look after their own best interest, just as we do here.
Absolutely.
You know, you look after your best interest. They get their oil from, and look at the economy they've got. They need the oil, the Iranian oil. They will be friends to Iran, no matter what Mr. Biden or the United States does, because it's for their best interest.
If there was an issue with Iran that put them in great difficulties, it's that they spent and we were selling them the arms. They spent too much on defense, on military equipment and planes and high-end technologies from the United States, and they spent a higher percentage of their GDP than the Soviets did. The Soviets spending on military ultimately is going to be one of the key factors in their collapse. It's going to happen to Iran much more quickly. And when we asked Iran for that deal, could you lower the price for us and flood the market with cheap oil in 1975, 76? They say no, because economically they're in trouble. They need the higher prices and they won't make the deal. The Saudis, it's going to hurt them for a short period, but they make some really good deals. They get some really good benefits from their relationship with the United States. And again, it changes the balance of power there. But you are right. Iran has a heritage of being the power in that region. And there is reason to think that they can regain that position at some point again. They are already growing stronger in many ways. Okay. Again, the obvious thing is we need oil, and we use too much, and so does all the industrial world. And we can have all the environmental activism that we want. We haven't created energy independence. We have all sorts of movements to find other sources of fuels, alternative fuels, non-fossil fuels. We have all sorts of greater efficiency in the machines that we build. We just use too much oil, and we have to pay for it. And since we have to pay for it, we go through these periodic bouts with inflation. We're in a bout with it now. And one of the keys, one of the first things that people were pointing to before we got into this current inflationary spiral is gasoline prices are going up. It's one of the first keys. It always has been, and probably always will be, at least in the way in which the global economy is structured today. It is built on oil. If we don't have oil, we're in trouble. And again, go back to Churchill. He saw that right away, and he made sure that the British government bought 51% of the Anglo-Iranian oil company. And in World War II, Roosevelt did not want to go into North Africa to fight. But Churchill was insistent, because if they didn't go in there, England was without oil. Great Britain was without oil. And that, for him, that was his high priority. In the midst of a battle against the Nazis, against the Japanese, although the British aren't fighting over there at the moment, they have enough to do with Europe. To have as such a high priority, and understandably, you can't wage a war. War cannot be waged without lots of oil. Yeah. Part of what got us into trouble in terms of our consumption of oil was the Vietnam War. It cost a lot of oil to man those helicopters, man those aircraft carriers, man those planes and everything. Somebody? No.
Okay, so I feel like in World War II, we had enough oil for us.
Yes.
And enough oil to ship to the British, and enough oil to ship to the Russians.
Yep.
And how we go from being the world's big oil power.
It's almost inexplicable. If you said 1968, we provided enough oil to take care of ourselves and still export something. By 1970,
really, as late as 68.
As late as 68. By 1970, with our cars and everything that we're doing, all of a sudden, if this is the curve of our consumption use, it goes up like this.
So Eisenhower was the president that actually got us the car in every garage and whatever.
And he also built the interstates, which meant we were going to drive more.
Instead of using trains.
Yep.
And airplanes then became more commonplace.
Yes. And we are using domestically, forget Vietnam, domestically, we are between 1970 and 1973, pre-oil embargo, we are now buying 35% of the oil that we use. This is the world's greatest exporter. Up through the mid-60s, we were still the #1 exporter of oil, not any Middle Eastern country. But by 1970, we are a debtor in terms of oil. By 1973, it's 35% and climbing. In just 5, yes. And in those 5 years, it all of a sudden became, if somebody turned off the spigot, it's like trying to do cold turkey with a drug addiction. All of a sudden, you're in great pain. And America was in great pain in the 70s here because of all of this. I think it's very much analogous to an addiction. And one that we still haven't gotten over, and we still think if we can maintain prices and maintain flow, we'll be okay. But there are always, I can list about 8 oil shocks that threw our economy into a tizzy between 1973 and today. And we are still subject to that. That's why I said, when I began, it was before you got here, I said this was a significant change in modern American history. We got smacked in the face with the realization we're not in control. There are factors that can turn us upside down economically, even though we are a juggernaut. If the spigot to oil is turned off, all of a sudden, we are not the power we thought we were. That 25-year period from 45 to 70, when it was a golden age in the economy, constant boom. It was built on cheap oil, and the oil was cheap because we produced it ourselves. And it remained cheap when we began to borrow or to buy because we had enough muscle flexing that we could do that we could set the price. And the Arab nations would accommodate us. 1973 oil embargo, the first day they doubled the price of oil.
More closer to 4 times. It went from 311 a barrel to 1105.
The price ultimately in the 1 year,
a barrel, God bless.
in 1 year, the prices were quadrupled. And then it reverberates. It's an earthquake throughout the entire economy. The auto industry, the airplane industry, the trucking industry, everyone is reliant on this oil. And we still are. And again, I want to make sure that we don't just say, oh, the oil embargo. It's about the Arab-Israeli conflict and the OPEC nations were mad at us for supporting Israel. That's a complicating factor that can cause problems periodically. It's our addiction to oil, and that at any time, if the OPEC nations wish to flex their muscles, or they have a political agenda, or whatever it might be, or there's a revolution in Iran, the oil supply goes down. There's an Iraq-Iran war for 8 or 9 years, almost a decade. That cuts down the oil. There's the Gulf War. When Saddam Hussein leaves Kuwait, he sets 600 oil wells on fire. All of a sudden, oil production is down. And all of those things are like economic earthquakes that really impact our society because we don't just, isn't it nice that we get the oil? We desperately need it. Again, it's an addiction. It's something we cannot live without.
Also, there was a lot of short-sightedness. The reason we were buying the oil, because we could still make it, is we could buy it cheaper than we could produce it. So they looked at it that way, strictly as a penny and pound number, rather than keep the production going, like what's happening now. You know, he's not allowed drilling here, drilling there, this and all that. But the way they were doing it, like the Brits were the ones who spent the money and everything, did the exploration and did the finding of oil in Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that's why they were able to get the deals that you said. It was their expertise that they went there, and the Iranians and the Saudis were just so happy to let them do the work to find it, to do the drilling, to put all that work into it to find it, and then that. And when we were doing it here, because I can remember reading when they stopped drilling in Texas and all because, we could buy it a little bit less than what it costs us to make it here. And that is so friggin' short-sighted.
No. And, but,
So I have
yeah.
something to say that it's sort of off topic, but maybe it's not. So I'm still on this. You're telling me that in 1968 we were still an exporter.
Yep.
Okay, so something else about 1968. I've observed in my lifetime how the value of minimum wage has become horrible. And of course, I don't only become old enough to be aware of it in the 70s. So, but like, you can put yourself through college on minimum wage, with a minimum wage job, work part-time when I was going to college.
Right.
Okay. And now, of course, the price of education has gone up ridiculously.
60,000 easy.
And the value of minimum wage has gone down ridiculously. But it turned out, I wanted the internet to find out 1968 was the peak buying value of minimum wage in the United States.
Yeah.
So, what else is going on? We're wasting money on Vietnam, and we're wasting money on social programs. And, it just,
And consumers are consuming and not saving, and there's a whole lot of things going on. Again, because of what our topic is tonight, I'm looking at the impact of oil as central to it. It's not the only factor by any means, but it is one of those triggering products that in and of itself can throw us into an economic recession, can throw us into an inflationary spiral.
Needs oil. Your fertilizer is
Everything.
made out of oil.
Yep.
Get your
Plastics are made out of oil. You drive food to the grocery store from the farms, it's gotta use oil to do that. And when oil prices go up, so do food prices go up, so
energy is
do
needed to refrigerate
to
stuff.
refrigerate everything, everything.
And with the Israeli-Hamas war going on, we can expect that to happen again.
Yep.
Yes. Oh, no. And we're already in a period of inflation. I know the numbers are coming down. They are not as high as they were at their height, but they're still not down as much as people would like them to be. But for there to be an inflationary spike again would not be surprising. Now, it will not be as serious as what happened in the 1970s, where we hit stagflation rates of 22, 23, 24%. Those are unlivable. But those are the kinds of conditions that many other nations had to endure during our economic boom period. We thought we were immune to them. And again, the important thing out of the oil embargo is we learned we're not. Okay. There is two quick things here, a little bit repetitious, but this period is going to see a period in which the oil producing countries are little by little trying to incrementally gain control or greater control over the oil companies, over the profits, over the decision making, how much oil to extract, how much to export, what prices to set. And it's all incremental. In 1960, and that's when they start OPEC. And all it is a stronger negotiating position. It still will only make incremental changes. In 1973, before the Yom Kippur War, there was a meeting between Anwar Sadat and King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. And the meeting was over one thing. Anwar Sadat said, if the US or any other Western nations support Israel, we need to use oil as a weapon. And Faisal and Sadat made an agreement so that it was as soon as American aid was given to the Israeli government. And mind you, as we were talking last month, Yom Kippur War was going badly for Israel in the first 3 days. So badly that there was a danger that they could actually win the war and Israel's survival be in question. And without U.S. aid, in terms of, even when the Israelis had their successful counteroffensive, they were just about out of ammunition. They had a lot of broken tanks that needed spare parts. They needed some more planes. They needed more new tanks. If they don't get this, their counteroffensive, doesn't matter that it was successful, it will collapse and stop. It's just like when we were talking with Pearl Harbor. If the United States had if Pearl Harbor hadn't happened and the US Navy blocked Japan's access route to oil, as powerful as the Japanese military was, they'd have been stopped in their tracks. You cannot wage war without oil. That's just the way it is. And again, in terms of America's position on this, we were talking last month. We talked today as if, Israel and the United States have always been best friends, and that we have always supported them, and we've been there. They've been our staunchest allies, and we've been their staunchest allies. That's not true. In 1948 war, Israel got its tanks and ammunition from Stalin because we didn't send it to them. And Johnson was very generous to them. Kennedy was not. And Nixon was not up until the very end. But he, I mean, again, if you listen to or read any of the transcripts from Nixon's tapes, there's a lot of anti-Semitic remarks in them, and comments about Israel that are, you know, if they were reported today, would draw outrage. So,
Which is kind of, we're thinking about what you said about that past month.
right,
And, you know, Nixon with his Quaker background, you know, and really probably not encountering a whole lot of Jews in his life. It's just kind of strange that he would be like that.
yeah. Nixon's administration, obviously in this period, 72, 73, is in a lot of difficulties. And he is looking, Israel doesn't offer him many benefits. When he basically, he said in the 72 election, I don't need to do anything for Israel because no Jew is going to vote for me. And that's literally on the tapes that he said that.
Wow.
And so Iran was his friend.
That's interesting because like 2 generations later, that's still the way it is. I mean, Obama hated Jews, and Trump was, you know, the best friend Israel's had amongst American presidents. I mean, his son-in-law is even Jewish, and most American Jews.
The Jewish vote is a Democratic coalition, element of the Democratic coalition, no question. And again, we talked last month, Kissinger's point was he wanted to help the Israelis just enough and make sure he didn't offend Arab oil. That was really important to him.
Kissinger always wanted order. He didn't care who really won or lost. He wasn't morally, you know, he says, whatever at the end, he wanted order, period.
Okay. Where I'm going to get into, I think that the Nixon-Iran relationship is really central here, really important. So that's going to be the focus of most of the end. I just want to list, though, half a dozen oil shocks that have affected our economy since then. And we had the oil embargo, obviously. Then we had the Iranian Revolution. That impacted our economy. The Iran-Iraq war for better part of a decade affected oil production and our economy. The Gulf War, again, Hussein sets fire to 600 oil wells. The Arab Spring in 2010 and following, that affected oil production and affected inflation and our economy. And I don't have a year for this because it's not a specific year. China has become, after the United States, the great absorber of the energy sources in the world, because prior to then, they were not an industrial nation.
Is joining.
And India is got, yeah, exactly. And when you have those two huge countries, those two huge populations asking for their share of the oil, even if the oil production maintains its level, you've got draws on it that are enormous. And we have not backed down in terms of scaling down our use. We still demand, I think as a nation in the world, we use 23% of the energy that is produced. That is far beyond our size in terms of population ratio. India and China are going to do similar kinds of things. China's already doing it. And of course, the whole industrial world is doing it. But when China entered, God, all of a sudden, the question of what oil would be available, how much would be available, what would the price be? These were enormous factors here for us. Okay. I think one of the more interesting stories in here is the relationship with Iran. Iran is probably the most westernized of the Middle Eastern countries. They, again, especially under the Shah, he was a point of pride for him to bring in sophisticated Western customs and dress and everything else. But the Shah had one real problem, and that was he was a spender, and he loved to get U.S. arms sales, and Nixon fed him anything he wanted, basically. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is, I don't know if you have a clear sense of what the Nixon doctrine is, but it's kind of a corollary to the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine said, if anybody is threatened by an outside force, and by outside force, he meant communism and the Soviet Union, we will come immediately to their aid. The Nixon doctrine is, yes, we will, but we won't do the fighting. Vietnam was a clear enough example of, if you put US troops in danger, the impact that it has on a presidency and on the country. So he wanted to say somebody in the region needs to do the fighting. So he basically said to Iran, we'll feed you all the arms you ask for. If there is a conflict and troops need to go in, your troops go in. And the Shah said yes. So that was a big deal for us because he didn't want us embroiled in a Middle Eastern war. Let's have a proxy. Let's have a stand-in the region who can do it. And that was Iran. Now, for this, we offered arms sales to Iran that were larger than to any nation. What we have given to Israel was dwarfed by what we were giving to Iran in terms of military equipment, the high-end stuff. And the problem is, again, it was too expensive for Iran and put their economy into difficulties. But that selling that got us some things. One, he agreed to be our stand-in if there is a regional conflict. Two, we had CIA bases in Iran because Iran has a very long border with the Soviet Union, and their bases there were very convenient for spying on the Soviets.
Yes.
And that was very, very important to us.
Plus, they didn't want the Soviets selling them anything.
Absolutely, it's a question of well, yes, I think Iran, if they needed to, would have turned there. But Iran we were their best source at this point with our friendship. We were their best source, and I don't think they would have turned to the Soviets yet.
That was also our goal, to keep other countries from buying Soviet weapons.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't remember much about this, but in World War II, there was like this invasion of Iran, with the Soviets from the north, and Britain, I don't know, were we involved coming in from the south?
And they agreed, Russia and the other allied countries agreed that once the war was over, both sides would pull out, and the Soviets refused to pull out.
No.
Came a kind of a staring contest, a pissing contest between Truman and Stalin, and finally Stalin pulled out. But he knew the oil was there, and he actually wanted to stay there. And being there gave him a position of power that because the other allied countries pulled out, and the only power in there, and it was really an occupying power, was the Soviet Union, and their intention was to stay. And again, it's also a buffer country because they have a border together. And that one of the great things coming out of World War II is the Soviets wanted buffer countries to protect them. But it was also the oil, the oil, the oil. Think of all the things that the British did to control the Anglo-Iranian oil company. That's going to be for the Soviets. And all of a sudden, I begin to question, if we do an alternate history and they stay there, do they collapse in 1989 because of a bad economy? Or are they still able to stand and sustain for a decade longer, for 2 decades longer, because of the oil money? I don't know. That's just a supposition.
Michael, isn't that the same issue that the Soviets wanted a protection border? Isn't that the same issue?
Oh, it is absolutely coming out of World War II.
Today, no,
And Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Oh, yes. Yes, you're right. No, it is. Also, Ukraine has riches that are beneficial to them too. And also, I think he just in general wants to recreate an empire.
Yes.
Yes, you were about to say something there.
I'm not sure. Well, I'll say something anyway. I'm not sure what I was thinking before. But the Soviets also picked up the Romanian oil fields. Except, well, eventually the Romanians kind of pulled away from the rest of the Eastern Bloc. And I guess because they were still very hardline communist, Brezhnev and whoever else let them get away with it. And Yugoslavia was kind of pulled away because they weren't as the gentleman
Yeah,
on the
Mr.
internet
B.
said, you know, so Yugoslavia wasn't as important because they weren't adjacent to the Soviet Union.
And Hungary would be the point where the Soviets would say no more. And we're going to go in and we're going to crush that revolution. Okay, there's one other piece of this puzzle. While all this is going on, Watergate's going on, the negotiations to end the war in Vietnam are going on. This is a very complicated time period. Again, I think you could make an argument that Nixon is the most impactful person in the last half of the 20th century because all the things that were going on during his time, whether you think he handled them successfully or unsuccessfully, these are major, major world changing.
And then his administration started.
Yeah. Okay, but there's one other piece in here with the Vietnam War negotiations. There is, again, this is part of what Kissinger wants. He knew they needed to get out. And he was really selling South Vietnam down the river. What the South Vietnamese wanted out of the peace negotiations, their one, you cannot not give us this demand, was North Vietnam pull all of its troops out of South Vietnam. And the North Vietnamese position was, we're not leaving and we want all the US troops out. That was the final disposition. North Vietnamese troops remained in South Vietnam, which meant inevitably that they were going to take South Vietnam, which they did. And America would leave. But to try and assuage the South Vietnamese in Saigon, Nixon wanted to send them a large shipment of arms and military equipment, but he couldn't. Because if he did, the public outcry would be beyond belief, and he wouldn't be able to get it through the Congress, and he'd have to do kind of an Iran-Contra secret deal, and the risks of it blowing up in his face were too great.
Yeah.
So he turned to the Shah and said, we've sold you all this really good equipment. Do me a favor, quietly ship it to South Vietnam. We'll replace it to you. We need you to be the indirect conduit by which this equipment gets to South Vietnam. And maybe the government in South Vietnam will say, well, at least they're arming us before we have to face the North Vietnamese. Mind you, they still were not happy. But the Shah did agree to this. But part of what he said was, because he was in economic trouble, tell you what, I'll do this for you. But not only do I want the arms, I want permission to raise oil prices. Now, this is before the embargo at this point. And the United States, Nixon says, you got carte blanche. Raise them as much as you want. We guarantee if you're selling it, we'll buy it. Now, you might be saying to me, wait a minute, doesn't that contradict higher oil prices? Shouldn't Nixon have been afraid of them? At this point, our economy is still okay. The oil embargo is going to be the trigger that turns us into a double dip recession. And this is going to be, he's going to raise oil prices 10%, 12%. Our economy can absorb that. It's when the oil embargo happens and in one day they double the price. Very shortly thereafter, that leads to a quadrupling of prices, and then they shut off the oil. That's catastrophic. We could have absorbed what Shah was asking to do, and he agreed to that.
Michael,
Yeah.
may I present an alternative point of view? Nixon had wanted, we had pulled out, and the initial thing was like we were going to do the analogy would be the Battle of the Bulge. He had planned to pull, it was a trap. He had planned to pull out all the troops, and all the North Vietnamese were out of the tunnels and they were on the march. And what he had planned to do is send in the B-50. They were out in the open as they were in the Battle of the Bulge, and he had planned to send in the B-52s and decimate them. Unfortunately, Ford had also, he was impeached, or he gave up. But anyway, his vice president Ford became president, and Kennedy and his ilk and all the others, John Kerry, they stopped him, and I think my view, it's atrocious because all those people who supported us uh, they were either murdered or internment, concentration camps, or they had boat people, and they were on the boats, suffered all sorts of indignities. And so there were a lot of people in this, and our government, State Department, said you can't abandon these people. There was also, I think I forget the name, monarchs in Cambodia who were also supportive of us, and they were decimated. It's very similar to what happened in Afghanistan too.
Yeah, I'm going to just plead ignorance here. I don't know that history. I've never heard that before. There may be some truth to it, but I think that Nixon at that point did not have the power to do any of these things that he wanted. And one of the things that he knew he had to do, he had to get, if he was going to keep public opinion from preventing him from really being pushed into impeachment, he had to get out of Vietnam as quickly as possible. He wanted to get out from earlier when he's going into Cambodia and Laos. He wanted to set up a situation where he could put the North Vietnamese under some pressure where they would come to the bargaining table a little more submissively. That was never something he was able to do. But it gets us off our topic here. Where I'm going to go at this point, and this is probably the last piece of this, is Gerald Ford's presidency. Gerald Ford in 1975, the embargo is over. The embargo was over somewhere around mid-74. Has a meeting with the Shah of Iran. OPEC apparently is talking about another 15% increase in the price of oil. Our economy still has not recovered. We are in danger of a second recession coming. That second recession is going to come. And so he goes to the Shah and says, look, I don't think you guys realize the seriousness of what the consequences could be. There were at least 4 countries, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Great Britain, that were one step away from bankruptcy, that they were going to collapse. You know, all the stories we tell about Greece and some other countries, Great Britain was in that position. Spain, Italy, and Portugal were in that position. And if they collapsed, again, those are 4 earthquakes that are happening with tremors going around the globe. If they happened, a lot of the loans that had kept them afloat up to this point were from the big U.S. banks, Chase, Morgan, etc. If those countries default on their loans, Chase goes down the toilet. So does Morgan. And all of a sudden, our economy is not just in a second recession, we might be in a depression. So this is really serious stuff. Right now is not the time for that increase. You've got to use your muscle in OPEC and tell them, please, hold off on this. Don't do this now. There are later times for negotiations, but this is a critical moment. These are in the last month of Ford's administration because he's lost to Carter, and but he is trying to at least prevent an economic disaster from being the immediate outcome when he leaves. And Ford says, you know, we can make all kinds of deals for you. We can, you know, if OPEC agrees to it, you'll get some gifts here. If they don't, we need you to lower your price and flood the market. If you can do that and we can survive this, and particularly these 4 NATO allies can survive this, that will make things better in the future for all of us. The problem is, economically, the Shah says, I need the higher prices too. I cannot survive. My economy is falling apart. My people are getting very rioting and all sorts of disturbances, social disturbances going on. This is a dangerous time for me. I cannot do this, and I'm not going to do it. He was pretty damn clear about it, and Ford knew it. So then Ford goes to King Faisal, and this is going to be a shift in the power because he's going to make the same deal with the Saudis. And the Saudis realize that in the short term, it's going to cost them. In the long term, they're going to be huge beneficiaries. But I want you to think about Iran. Iran, part of the deal was we would buy oil from you. Don't worry. We stopped buying our oil from Iran. They have all these debts because of the arms sales. Their economy falls apart. And that's when you get all the rioting and all part. I mean, I don't care what revolution you are talking about. It may have an ideological backing to it, but economic factors determine if it's going to really rise up to a tumultuous level and lead to revolution. Well, the economy in Iran wasn't at that level. It was a mile above that level. Iran was in trouble. And this is a nation used to being in a position of power, having wealth and having influence and being the hegemonic leader of the Middle East. They are in trouble. And at the same time, we had always assumed that the revolution in Iran that would overthrow the Shah, if it happened, would come from the left. It comes from the religious right. And the Ayatollahs come into power, and we get that Iranian revolution, and all kinds of things are going to flow out of that. The hostage crisis, and our continuing enmity with Iran, and seeing them as the nation that is the sponsor of terrorism, and we're fearful that they might get the nuclear weapons, and a lot of our focus in foreign policy is in keeping Iran in check. Iran was our best friend. For 30 plus years, Iran was our best friend. They're not anymore. Who is our best friend? King Faisal and the Saudis. The irony is, Faisal did everything he said, and our country went into recession anyway. Now, it might have gone into a deeper recession had he not complied with these things. Can't tell you that. But again, I go back to the murder of Khashoggi. MBS paid no price for that. Should have. Except they control the spigot. They control the oil. And may have killed this man and quartered him, but we need their oil. And so he has not paid a price, and I don't think he will pay a price. I mean, it's beyond that at this point.
His own family will take him out, just like he took his whole family out. That's what's going to happen. You can't live forever. You can't live forever.
Yeah.
Nobody can. Nobody will live forever.
And the irony is, he was being touted as finally a more progressive king in the Arabian Peninsula, and of course he is not that. Okay, again, I also want you to understand, because I keep using the metaphor of earthquakes. The fall of Iran, forget the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis. Simply the fall from their position of power in the Middle East and the rising of the Saudis is another earthquake. Yeah. It's a restructuring of the global oil economy, the global oil market. And one of the things, I go back to a person in history, Talleyrand, and Talleyrand wanted balance and order. And if there are going to be changes, slow, incremental changes that we can accommodate. These, if OPEC raises the price of oil 5%, we can absorb it. It is these sudden surges that we cannot absorb, that we cannot manage, and that will throw our economy into great difficulty. And in some respects, and I'm not trying to make a political point here, whatever you think of Jimmy Carter, what did he inherit? He inherited stagflation, interest rates were in the interest rates and inflation rates that were totaling over 20%. He inherited the Iranian Revolution, which would lead to the Iranian hostage crisis. And, every president has their horrors and dilemmas and difficulties to deal with. Those were two giant ones. And they made America look weak and fragile. And the message of Ronald Reagan of It's Morning in America resonated well with people who wanted to, I want to feel good. I want to feel positive. I want to feel hopeful. You know, perhaps somebody else in Carter's place, if Carter hadn't won, whether it was Ford or somebody else, might have managed these crises better. I'm not sure they could have been managed better. One of the things that was interesting to me about Jimmy Carter, if Jimmy Carter had been able to control his party, and therefore, because the Democrats were in charge of both houses of Congress, he put together an energy plan that might have been the best effort at an energy plan that America has ever put together, but it never went into effect. And in today's world, we still have political pundits and politicians screaming, we need to become energy independent. We've been screaming that since 1973.
Now we have fracking. We have fracking.
Yep.
We have solar panels. We have solar panels that I wish I could afford, and all of that. We know what we should do, but I guess it's the will to do it. And I mean, it was oil in the 1970s. It's going to be uranium looking ahead, because no cell phone will work without uranium.
You're right.
And no MRI, Dr. Avellino can tell us, no PET scan machine, no ultrasound machine, no scan machine will work without uranium. And yet it's this typical story of the lion and the ant, because the ant has got the uranium. You think you can control it forever, and it won't happen, because sooner or later people will wake up. That's what's going to happen. I mean, just before the shutdown, I did a lot of travels, and one of the things I noticed coming back to going out of the United States, was that we were not trying hard enough to use paper more than plastic. Everybody else is trying, but we need to kind of like see what's going on around us in order not to hurt whether the environment or people. And we are definitely not the lion, not if you're relying on my uranium and my oil.
No.
Again,
I mean, we have an example. When Reagan came into the White House, the first thing he did was to remove the solar panel.
Yes, he did.
That
Yes, he
Carter
did.
had put.
I forgot that. I forgot that.
Thing.
I forgot. Yes. It's not forward thinking, and that's my point. We have to, at least in 2016, I went to a Caribbean island, and I was surprised. I went to the bar and I had a drink, and I said, what sort of straw is this? They stopped using plastic straws. And a West Indian country. So, I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not putting America down. I'm just saying we need to kind of be, although we don't have borders like Europe, we have to be aware of what's happening in the rest of the world and try and be part of it. You still go to shops here, and you're given 20 plastic bags. Whereas in England in 2013, when I was in England, everyone had their shopping bag, and you got your groceries and you put it in your bag. Just little things like that will cut down on this overall consumption that we seem to I mean, we are guzzlers of everything. It's nice to have it. It's nice to have the money, but life doesn't work like that.
Well, if you think about, the United States uses 22% of the energy. I don't know what percentage China uses, but I'll make up a number. I'll say it's 13%. About half of what we do. Maybe it's more than that. I don't know. And then you say India is going to come big time into the industrial, is already, and is going to grow as an industrial country. Maybe they'll use another 10. That's half of the oil. That's half of the energy in the world for 3 countries. Now, 2 of them are huge populations, but we should not be using it. And then Gene had said earlier, we get into a crisis and we say, let's get smaller cars, let's do this. But 6 months later, 2 years later, and the crisis is past, or at least we think it's past, and we go on. Again, when I started this, I thought I was just going to talk about, boy, we had a bad time. I used to pump gas during this period. We had a bad time. There were lines 6 blocks long and never ending. And I just one car after another. And then it was over, and we kind of dismiss it and say that was a kind of a strange blip in our history, but let's go on being America. And the thing is, oil is a finite resource. And again, I don't think we realize that in our golden age for the economy, 45 to 70, that we were there only because, not only, but largely because of cheap oil. And that once, what the embargo showed us, once the cheap oil is gone, our economy can be toppled, can collapse. And it again, we went into a very serious recession. We were working our way out of it, finally climbed out of it, and then we took a second double dip. And we have had numerous, I mean, just how many economic dips have we taken in the last 50 years, and how many of them have been connected to inflation caused by the oil market and all that. Again, we have a large environmentalist activist movement, but we are where we are, and we haven't really moved much better. There are things maybe we could be worse than we are, but it's still a difficult situation. If anybody have anything else they want to add here, I think I have finished what I need to say, except I will say, and I said this to Gene earlier, I was surprised. I didn't think this was as seismic an event as I do think it is now. And that it is still something that we're not dealing with the same politics that caused the oil embargo, but we're still dealing with the problem of the oil addiction and how vulnerable we are because of it.
Well, I have to go and eat. I'm hungry.
Okay. I really appreciate everybody who comes to these things. That people
This
are
was
here.
this was a lovely topic. It really, really
Yes.
was.
I-
Yeah, I've learned a lot. I've learned things that I didn't know. I've learned a lot tonight.
Okay. And just remind people, no, December we don't have a meeting.
Yeah.
We'll come in
Okay.
January again, and we're doing the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, guys. Good night.
Thank you all.
Well,
Happy
bye,
Thanksgiving
happy
and Merry Christmas.
Thanksgiving, and
Merry
happy
Christmas.
holidays.
We'll see if they stay or not.
She's got to get there, go to get dinner, but some was to stay. Couple of things with current events have happened, and then a couple of things about something else. I know a lot about World War II because that was the big thing I could read about when I was a little kid.
Sure.
Growing up with my father's war and whatnot, but they didn't have books. They never had books on Korea and
Right.
Vietnam was still going on, whatever. So most people think the largest airborne operation in World War II was Market Garden or D-Day. But it was actually, I think in 43, the Soviets were pushing the Germans back, and to cross the Dnieper River was actually the largest airborne operation.
Okay.
So with that in the back of my mind, buried on page 7 of today's Inquirer, the Ukrainians have now crossed the Dnieper River going the other direction and have a beachhead successful going on. So if you root for the Iranians, if you're